What exactly are you doing?
I thought I'd try on your speed holster rig.
Why exactly?
See if it makes my bum look big.
That seems fair enough to me. Whatever you do, don't drop the revolver though. Make sure that lock thingy's done up.
Why? Will it go off or something?
No, there's a drop safety. In any case, I really hope it's not loaded. It isn't, is it?
Let me get back to you on that one.
That gives me a great idea for the next episode of Bloke on the Range. Don't forget that. Hello, good evening and welcome to another action-packed and fun-filled episode of Bloke on the Range. This evening we're looking at the exciting topic of Smith & Wesson drop safeties. Why? Because reasons. When my darling wife came in right there with my 5.86 on her hip, I suddenly realised that in my shooting bag I had one of each type of Smith & Wesson drop safety, and I thought, well, why don't we crack open the old girls and let you all have a look. Now what we've got here is a 455 hand ejector, late First World War. We've got an M&P in 38 Smith & Wesson, 1944, possibly early 45, and we've got a 5.86, 1981. So let's break them open and let you have a look. Now first of all, let's have a quick refresher on how you get one of these apart. First of all, you select the correct screwdriver. So first of all, we take the grip panel off, and then on these older ones, there's 4 screws that hold the side plate on. On the later ones, they've only got 3 screws, and the top corner is held in with a little tab. Now if we take these off, and I always find it useful to keep track of which screw is which. In principle these bottom 3 are the same, but you never know. Now we've got all the side plate screws off now, and in fact having taken that screw out we can now remove the cylinder if we want to, which we will just to make life easier. Now, this is where people go wrong. People will sometimes go in and start trying to lever the side plate off. In fact, all you have to do is hold the revolver by its barrel and give it a tap. Now let's have a little look inside at what's going on here. For those that don't know, that's the mainspring, makes the hammer fall. That's the hammer, trigger, cylinder stop, and this little piece here is called the trigger return slide. And the important springs for the trigger pull are this one, obviously, that makes the hammer fall, and the return spring in the trigger return slide there. And the nice thing about Smith & Wessons is that if you're careful, you can remember that we have to pull this back if we want to operate the trigger. We can see how it works, and we can see how it works in double action and how it works in single action. Now one thing you should be aware of if you're doing this is you're putting far more stress on the pins than if it was in place, because the pins fit into corresponding holes in the side plate and are much better supported. So what we'll do is we'll just take the tension off the mainspring if we're going to muck around with this. Now you'll see that when the hammer's forward and the trigger is released, the firing pin doesn't protrude from that hole right there. This is because, unlike the Bulldog revolver I showed you in an earlier video, the hammer on a Smith & Wesson, and in fact on most revolvers, withdraws once you release the trigger, and we can show this quite easily. So the trigger's pulled, let's get the light in there, firing pin protrudes, and when you release the trigger it withdraws. Let's just show you that again. Sorry for the light, we're working with what we've got here. So, firing pin protrudes, release the trigger, it withdraws. Now why is that? On a Smith & Wesson, when the trigger is pulled, the trigger return slide doesn't block the hammer. And there's a little cam surface there on the hammer and a corresponding cam surface on the trigger return slide. And when you let go, it withdraws the hammer. And when the trigger is forward, you'll see that the cam surface is blocked against the top of the trigger return slide. Can't go forward. You can hit that as hard as you want, in principle, and it can't go forward. So let's try that again. Trigger's pulled, hammer comes back, trigger return slide gets out of the way, hammer falls, trigger return slide cams the hammer back, and then blocks it. Now the first type of drop safety effectively here is that it is inherently safe. If that is hit, this can't pivot clockwise because it's entirely blocked by the trigger return slide. That's great. It's safe. But, and this is a big but. What happens if it gets dropped on the hammer so hard that that pin shears through? Now remember that it's supported at both sides, so if it shears, it's going to shear right through. So what can happen with this early type is if it gets a really, really good hard knock, it can nevertheless fire the cartridge that's in line. We're talking a really, really hard knock here. But they thought it was a significant enough problem to want to engineer it out. So now we'll skip forward to the first type of proper hammer block safety that they put in there. So, on to number 2. Excuse the grease, I like to keep my revolvers pretty greased up. Now what you might notice here is, compared to the other one, on the hand there's a little sort of rib sticking off. As a comparison here, the hand, there's nothing on it. This one has a special rib there at an angle, and it's basically, it extends out the back at an angle like that. And what we have here in the side plate is a positive trigger block. This here is withdrawn when the hand rises, and the hand rises when the trigger is pulled to turn the cylinder, and then at any other time that is in the way of the hammer. That angled rib on the back of the hand pushes on this little tab here, difficult to see on video I know, which cams that out of the way. So when that is in position on the revolver, which way around are we? That way around. That tab there is stuck in here where my screwdriver blade is, so that even if that pin breaks, the hammer can't go forward. Great! But, and this is another big but, there's a story that during the Second World War, somebody carrying one of these, in fact a Victory model, which is very similar to this but parkerized instead of blued, was working on a ship, dropped it 2 decks, and it landed on the hammer. Went off. Why? Now a lot of the oils used at the time, after a while they'd get gummy and sticky, and this is sprung here. So it's positively pushed out the way by the hand, but it requires its own spring tension, it's sprung there, to bring itself back. And the problem was, once that had got all gummed up in practice and manipulation, it gets pushed in, but it's basically glued in, so it's not doing anything. Oops. So at about the end of the Second World War, they replaced this system with this. Now number 3. I do like things that go ping. Now because this one is my competition gun, I'm naughty and I take the drop safety out of it because it improves the trigger pull. I'm not going to be dropping it 2 decks on a victory ship, so I don't feel any compunction in leaving it out. I actually have 2 of them in here right now so that you can see what they do from each side. Now what they did here is on the trigger return slide there's a pin right there. You should be able to see that about there. That little flag there, that's the hammer block, which goes in between the frame and the hammer face and sits on the pin. Now this isn't a transfer bar. A lot of cheap revolvers have a transfer bar which simply allows the hammer to strike the firing pin. This isn't a transfer bar, this is a block. Now on the other side, on the side plate, you can see the slot it runs in, and there's an opening there for the cam track to go in. So when the trigger's not pulled, that's up, it's blocking the hammer. When you pull the trigger return slide moves backwards, takes that down with it. Trigger return slide moves backwards and draws the hammer block down out of alignment, and when the trigger returns it's positively pushed back up. And the advantage of this system is that it can't get totally gummed up with oil and fail to operate, because it is positively driven both up and down. It's not relying on its own spring. Effectively, it will only not come down if the trigger doesn't go forward, and that's a mightily much more powerful spring than the one in the side plate. So there you go. Obviously taking this out voids all warranties, but this is more than 30 years old anyway, so meh. As a general point, when putting these things back together, be gentle. They're an extremely tight fit. Tap them gently with something very gentle, something plastic or rawhide, and then once you've got it most of the way down, then put the screws in, and don't tighten one screw down really hard before tightening the others. Tighten them down progressively. So what I'll do first is I'll tighten them down till they nip up. That one's nipped up. Then this one here. Oops. So that nips up. This one here. And then each one little by little till it's sufficiently tight. That one suddenly takes more. That nips up at the bottom. And connoisseurs will have noticed that I've done something stupid, which is I've not put the cylinder back in. Skip to the end. So, that's it. I've now got a pile of revolvers to put back together, but in the meantime, see you again sometime. Cheers!